Greetings, mighty companions, and welcome back to Practical and Healing Applications of A Course in Miracles with me, Anna Kujawa-Quinn. And as you may have noticed, I'm only doing my Monday classes now on Facebook live stream or possibly YouTube live for the winter, so that I'm not driving down the hill down to Denver in the wintertime. So, welcome. And I already did the random number generator prayer to see what it is that we were going to do as guided by Spirit. So I'm just going to take 2 minutes just to open up the class, just to breathe and do a little opening meditation to allow ourselves to step out of the world, step away from the world for a little bit, that we might join together in this holy space and listen to the truth and be healed by the truth together. So, if you haven't already, go ahead and close your eyes and take a breath. Turn up the music a little bit and just breathe. Spirit of truth, spirit of healing that lives within each one of us. We thank you for this opportunity to listen to the truth together and to be healed by the truth together. We ask you to be in charge and decide for healing for us through this gathering today. We ask for your guidance, your wisdom, your comfort, your love. Truly, you know the prayers of our heart. You know our calls for love, our calls for help. And you know exactly what would answer our calls for love. And we offer this healing circle to you, Spirit, that you might take this healing circle and the truth therein and take it around the world. Take whatever truth that we accept today in this healing circle and take it around the world. Share it with those around the world who really need a miracle to save them today. And thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Spirit, for this opportunity to join with other like minds in hearing the truth that not only sets us free, but sets free the world with us. Thank you, Spirit. And to that we say amen. Alrighty. So where we're at in both books, the original edition and the blue covered edition, is chapter 19, section 2. Chapter 19, section 2. And the title of this section is Sin versus Error. Beautiful. All right. Beautiful. It says, sin versus error. It is essential that error be not confused with sin. And it is this distinction between sin and error which makes healing possible. So what makes healing possible? The distinction, making the distinction between whether something is a sin or whether something is an error. Making a distinction between sin or error. Is this a sin or is this an error? So that distinction is what is crucial for healing. It's what makes healing possible. Thank you, Greg, for posting that. Hi, Tricia. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Justin. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
And Bobby.
And Bobby. It was Justin.
Yeah,
and Liliana. Hi, Liliana. All of our Monday folks are here. Wonderful. I'm so glad. You, Daniel, I've decided to do my Monday classes from my home here in Conifer for the winter. So This is where I'll be doing class. But I'm still doing Sunday classes at the Miracle Center most Sundays, or every other Sunday at 11 a.m. and that's in person at the Rocky Mountain Miracle Center. All right. So then it says, it is essential that error be not confused with sin, and it is this distinction between error and sin which makes healing possible. Why? Because error can be corrected, which means the wrong made right. But sin, were it possible, would be irreversible. That's why the distinction between sin and error has got to be made for healing to be even possible, because error can be corrected and healed, but sin, were it possible, would be irreversible. So that's the difference between error. The first distinction between error and sin is that error is something that can be corrected. It can be healed. But sin indicates something that is irreversible, even by God. So, all right. That's why for healing, the distinction between whether this is an error or a sin is crucial. Hi, Jean. Lovely to see you. All right, here we go. And we are, by the way, thanks for posting it, we're in chapter 19, section 2, sin versus error, and we are going to paragraph 3. The belief in sin is necessarily based on the firm conviction that minds, not bodies, can attack. So, the belief in sin is based on the illusion, the belief that it's minds that attack and not bodies. Sin assumes that one mind can intentionally attack and injure another mind. That's what sin assumes. Sin assumes and implies that minds are both separate and changeable, which minds are not. Only bodies have the characteristics of being separate and changeable. That is why only bodies can truly attack. So if we're talking about sin, that is based on the belief that it is the minds that attack and not just bodies. And since sin is based on the belief that minds attack and not just bodies, sin implies that the mind is guilty. That's what sin implies, that the mind is guilty. And sin implies that not only is the mind guilty, but the mind will forever so remain guilty unless a mind not part of that mind can give that mind absolution. That's the sin story right there. Your mind has sinned, and unless another mind separate from your mind gives your mind absolution, well, too bad. Your sin is irreversible. Oh well, better luck next time. That's what sin means, and that's what sin implies. Yeah, Tricia. Then it says this. It says, sin calls for punishment, just like error calls for correction. What does sin call for? If it's a sin, it calls for punishment. If it's an error, what does it call for? Correction. And the belief that punishment is correction is clearly insane. For sure. Not to mention does not work. Look at our punitive system. Look at our so-called justice system, which is punishing people who have committed crimes. Now, does our so-called justice system, does our penal system correct? When people go into our punishment system that we call the justice system, do they come out corrected? Do they come out rehabilitated? Obviously not. So what we believe is correction in our world is punishment, and we've also all seen that punishment does not correct error. What do people learn when they go into the justice system? What do people learn when they go to jail? Do they get the correction of the errors that made them do that crime in the first place? No, they come out learning how to be better criminals, right? So punishment does not correct. The belief that punishment corrects That's insane. Look at what we do in our relationships. You know how we punish each other with guilt? Does that work? Does ever the people that you punish with guilt say, thank you so much. I have seen the errors of my way. I feel so much better. You know, does punishment ever correct errors? Does it ever? We know the truth that it does not. All right. So the belief that punishment is correction is clearly insane. So let us remember that in all of our relationships. Let us remember that punishing people with guilt does not correct anything. It doesn't make anybody stop doing whatever they were doing at all. Nor does it correct whatever mental conditions were going on that produced that so-called negative behavior. So let us remember that the belief that punishment is correction is clearly insane and it does not work. Okay, so if you want to know how to really change something, just remember that punishment doesn't do it. So whether you're punishing yourself or you're punishing somebody else with guilt, which is the belief in sin, it does not work. It is clearly insane. So that's really good to know. Beautiful. And hi, Bridget. Lovely to see you. Bridget says, how to be a better criminal. LOL. Exactly. If you attack somebody with guilt because of whatever error you think they're making, all that's going to happen from that is that they're going to be a bigger jerk. They're going to be a bigger a-hole in your perception, right? Because what is it that produced that error in the first place? It was guilt. You know, people who feel guilty, people who feel ashamed, people who were taught they were sinful, they do unloving things. That's why they do unloving things. Not because they're stupid, not because they're a jerk, but because they learned to feel shame. They learned that they are guilty. They learned that they are a sin. They learned that they're sinful. And what do people do when they feel guilty or feel sinful? They do unloving things. They're in pain, and so they give pain. So giving somebody pain, giving them more guilt is only going to increase the conditions that brought about their bad behavior in the first place, including you. So remember that about yourself. Punishing yourself with guilt does not correct the error that you are suffering with, right? If you got some bad habit going on that you would like to change, well, attacking yourself with guilt is not going to work to correct whatever mistakes you're making right now. Guilt doesn't work. Guilt is punishment, and guilt does not work. And it's insane. So let's remember that whenever we're perceiving an error within ourselves or an error within another. So now we're in paragraph 2. Sin is not error. Why? Because sin entails an arrogance which the idea of error lacks. What do you mean? What do you mean sin entails an arrogance that the idea of error lacks? Well, to sin would be to violate reality and to succeed. Oh yeah, that's pretty arrogant. I can violate reality and succeed. Look how powerful I am. I just kicked God off the throne of reality and established reality myself. Dang, aren't I bad? That's why sin entails arrogance that the idea of error doesn't have. Because to sin would be to violate reality and to succeed. In other words, sin is the proclamation that attack is real and guilt is justified. That is what sin is. Sin assumes that you and others are guilty. Sin assumes that you and everybody are guilty. And sin assumes that you and everyone has thus succeeded in losing your innocence and making of themselves what God did not create. That is what sin implies, and that is what sin assumes. That they are guilty and they have succeeded in losing their innocence and making of themselves what God did not create. That is what sin implies, and that is what sin assumes, whether that's within yourself or with another. Okay, then that's what that is what's going on when you are feeling guilty, or that's what's going on when you are giving somebody else guilt. When you are feeling guilty, you are assuming that you are guilty and that you have succeeded in losing your innocence, that you have made of yourself what God did not create. God did not create sin and guilt. God did not create a creation, us, that could be sinful, that could be guilty. God just did not create that as us according to A Course in Miracles. And that is where A Course in Miracles differs profoundly and fundamentally than other spiritual philosophies or other religions. Other religions assume that God did create sin and that God created God's creation, us, in sin, and that we are born in sin and we do a lot of sinning, and the only way to correct, atone for that sin is through punishment. Okay, that is what all the religions assume and imply. And A Course in Miracles says the exact opposite. All right. He says, so when the idea of sin and guilt, seeing somebody or yourself as guilty, creation is seen as not eternal. In other words, with the idea of sin and guilt, the will of God is seen as open to opposition and defeat. So sin and guilt is the belief that what God wants, innocence and sinlessness, can be defeated. Like God created children innocent and then we messed it all up. God created me pure and innocent and then somehow I screwed it up and now I am guilty. Okay, that is what the belief in sin assumes about us and others, the children of God. So you can see how what is laying down here is that sin, the belief in sin, is the ultimate arrogance. The belief in sin is the ultimate arrogance. It's the belief that you can change what God created as sinless and guiltless into something guilty and ugly. In other words, you can defeat God by what you've turned yourself into. And no matter what you think you've done and how guilty you feel about what you think you've done, you cannot be guilty. You were created innocent and guiltless, and that creation was eternal, and you can't change it. Not in yourself or anybody else, no matter what they have done, no matter what you have done. You can't change yourself from what God created you to be, which is sinless and guiltless. Now, you can be in error. You can be wrong. You can be in error. You can make a mistake. But that does not make you guilty or sinful. And so you don't need any punishment to correct or atone for yourself, and you don't need to punish anybody else in order to make them atone for their mistake. Right? That just doesn't work. I mean, you'd think that we would have recognized that by now, that punishment does not correct. You would think that we would recognize by now that giving guilt and punishing does not work. It does not change anything. It doesn't change the conditions in a person's mind and soul that makes them do the so-called bad behavior. We should recognize that by now, but at this point, we don't recognize the obvious. We don't see the obvious yet, and that's why we need A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles is just laying out the obvious. It's just telling us what obvious is. What is obvious? With in the Course in Miracles, what is the second coming? The second coming is the return of sanity. That's what the second coming is. It's not the meting out of punishment, right? Where God comes in and goes, all right, who's with me, who's not? Okay, get ready for the punishment. The second coming is the return of sanity. That's what the second coming is. And so, when sanity comes, sanity recognizes that there is no error that is irreversible. There is no error that any child of God can make, or any soul that God created can make, that is irreversible, that makes their damnation inevitable, that makes their punishment inevitable. There is no error that you can make or that I can make that can't be corrected. Okay? But remember, sin is the belief that there are some errors that they can make that can't be corrected, that can't be forgiven, that can't be reversed. That's what sin is, the belief that there are some errors that not even God could correct. That's what sin is. That you could make an error, or they could make an error that couldn't be corrected by love, and an error that even God would be powerless to correct or to forgive. You see how the belief in sin is the ultimate arrogance. And what a wonderful thing to remember when you have made an error and you are feeling guilty and you are feeling tempted to attract punishment to yourself, thinking that that is how errors are corrected. So it's very, very, very helpful when you are feeling guilty, because remember, feeling guilty is the assumption that what you did was a sin that can't be corrected except with punishment. Now, the truth of the matter is that you've made a mistake, you're in error, and the only thing that corrects error is a love, is forgiveness, right? And the reason you don't want to feel guilty about your error is because, number one, the guilt don't work to change that behavior, and number two, guilt is an unconscious request for punishment so that you can feel innocent again. That's what A Course in Miracles says about guilt. It is an unconscious request for punishment. Now, when you unconsciously request punishment because of something you've been feeling guilty about, it will come. It will come, but not because of proof that you are guilty or that you did something bad. It comes because you've asked for it. And God Himself must honor your freedom of choice and say, okay, that's not my will for you, but free will. If you are asking for punishment, that's what you're going to attract to yourself. If you're feeling guilty, then you're going to be unconsciously attracted to a person or a situation that feels punishing, that doesn't feel good, that hurts. And not because you're being punished, but because you are trying to punish yourself, because you want to feel innocent again. And you learned from the past, badly, wrongly, that when you have sinned, when you've done something wrong, that after you get your punishment, you can go back out to play again. You're innocent again. That's what we all learned. And so when you have made a mistake and you feel guilty, you are looking unconsciously for something to punish you so that you can feel innocent again. Well, we don't want to do that. That's not necessary. You don't need to feel guilty to receive correction for your mistake. So that's what we want to tell ourselves when you feel like you've made a mistake somehow. All right. Beautiful. And it says, sin. And then, by the way, we are in paragraph 2, and we are in the original edition, the original dictation. And I am not sure if this next sentence is in the edited version, the blue covered edition. But so if you don't recognize it, that's why. I love it. Bridget says, "Dang, we are so brainwashed." Yes, we are. And that's what A Course in Miracles is. It's a big washing, a washing for your brain from the belief in sin that was so deeply ingrained in our brain. It says, sin is the, quote, grand illusion underlying all the ego's grandiosity. For by the belief in sin, God Himself is changed and rendered incomplete. All right. So, Bridget, we're in chapter 19, section 2. It's called Sin versus Error. And we just finished. We're just finishing the last sentence in paragraph 2 in the original dictation. Thank you, Tricia. All right. Beautiful. I love that. Sin is the grand illusion underlying all the ego's grandiosity. Because by the belief in sin, God himself is changed and rendered incomplete. Yeah, so that's the ego's grandiosity. I am God. I establish reality. God, get off that throne, God. I'm God. And I say that that sin is real. And but the belief in sin is literally believing that you have changed and rendered God incomplete. That's how arrogant our guilt is.
If we're made in God's likeness and then we've changed, then God's changed.
Yes, exactly right. If we're made in God's likeness, then if God has changed, then we have changed.
If we change, then God's changed.
If we change, then God is changed. If we're made in God's image, then if we are guilty, then God is guilty. If God can be changed by our beliefs in guilt and sin, then that's how God is too. Then God is changeable. Then God's just as moody and bipolar as we are. And that's what the Course in Miracles is saying, is that God doesn't change. God doesn't change. And that also means, since we're made in God's image, we don't change either. We don't go from innocent to guilty, back to innocent again with some punishment, and then back to guilty again when you did the thing you weren't supposed to do, and then back to innocent when you go and confess and do the punishment rituals. So sin is the belief that God can change and that you could do something that changes the way you were created to be by God. That's what the belief in sin is. And sin is what underlies the guilt that we experience. And you could also call that shame. Beautiful. Now, it says in paragraph 3, now we can be mistaken. That's obvious. Which means we can deceive ourselves. We can even turn the power of our mind against ourselves, obviously, but we cannot sin, period. We cannot sin. You can be mistaken. You can deceive yourself. You can even turn the power of your mind against yourself, but you cannot sin. And they cannot sin. They can be mistaken. They can deceive themselves. They can even turn the power of their mind against themselves, but they cannot be guilty. They cannot sin. They cannot make an error that cannot be corrected by love. Let's remember that when we're holding a grievance against somebody. Let's remember, why don't we say that about that person? Okay, let's tell the truth about them. When in our perception, they are guilty or they have done something that is a sin or sinful. Let us remember that. Let us say this about them. Let us say, that person can be mistaken. That person can deceive themselves. That person can even turn the power of their mind against themselves. But that person cannot be guilty. That person is still innocent. They're just mistaken. But remember, there's a big difference between being mistaken and being sinful, being guilty. I love it. Hi, Carol. Lovely to see you. And Tricia says, I just want to run, hide, safety. Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, I want to tell you, Tricia, that you cannot be guilty, that you are innocent. And whatever it is that you're experiencing that makes you want to run and hide, Tricia, is just an error that can be corrected easily by love. Don't feel guilty about it. Say no to the temptation to feel guilty about it or to give guilt to somebody else about it, and acknowledge that it's an error and bring that error to love for correction. So thank you for sharing that, Tricia. Okay, beautiful. Then it says, there is nothing that we can do that would really change our reality in any way. Which means there's nothing we could do that would really change us or make us really guilty. Nothing. There's nothing you can do that can change you and make you really guilty.
Well, that's good. So
isn't that good news?
You can't get saved like most of the religions teach and then backslide and be unsaved again.
Right. I love that. So in most religions, you atone, and then you get made innocent, and then you backslide, and you become guilty again until you go and atone with some kind of punishment ritual, and then you feel innocent again, and then it's just a you know, a cycle.
So it's nice to
Groundhog Day.
It's nice to hear that, you know, it's just, you can't do anything to change it.
No, you cannot do anything to really change you from being innocent, sinless in your nature, to being somebody who's bad, wrong, guilty, any of that. Now that's the real good news. That's the real good news.
That's a real gift that can't be taken from you.
And that's the real gift from God that cannot be taken from you. No matter what you do, no matter what you think, you cannot change yourself from how God made you, created you to be. And God created God's creation to be guiltless and sinless forever. No change in that. There is nothing you can do that can change God's laws. There's nothing you can do. To think that you can change God's laws and change yourself into something God didn't create, something guilty, that's real arrogance. That is the ultimate of arrogance. And also, that's the ultimate blasphemy. Course in Miracles literally says that guilt is the ultimate blasphemy, because guilt is assuming that you are more right than God, that reality is yours to choose from, and that you are more right than God. Isn't that deep? Isn't that different? I love that.
And it's not a true gift if it can be taken away.
Exactly. It's not a true gift if it can be taken away. If your innocence is something that can be taken away because you did something that displeased God or someone, then it ain't a true gift. Okay? Now, so it says there's nothing that you can do that would really change your reality in any way or make you really guilty. Now, changing your reality in any way and making you really guilty, that's what sin would do. That's what sin does. Because that is sin's purpose. Yeah. What is guilt's purpose? What is the purpose of this guilt that I'm feeling, the shame that I'm feeling? The purpose of the guilt and the shame that I'm feeling or projecting is to change your reality and make you really guilty. That's the purpose of guilt. That's the purpose of shame. Whether you're experiencing yourself or projecting it or giving it to somebody else. Yet for all the wild insanity inherent in the whole idea of sin, sin is impossible.
So guilt's the tool we use to make things the way we want them to be, not as they are.
Sin, thank you, Greg. Sin is a tool that we use to make things as we want them to be instead of as they are. And notice how it said the whole idea of sin. So what is sin? Sin is just an idea. Sin is not an act. It's not a behavior. Sin is an idea. An idea that is wild insanity. Not just regular insanity, but wild insanity. Like, that's like way out there insanity. Like, you are so crazy, you do need to be, put in a small room, a padded room somewhere. That's how you're wildly insane. When you're feeling guilty, when you are projecting guilt onto another person, you are wildly insane. But you're innocent. Okay. Yeah, Tricia says, yeah, wild insanity. I love it. I love it. Isn't it comforting to hear that when you're feeling guilty and ashamed, that you are just misperceiving? You just are in error. Okay? That is your ultimate healing. That is your ultimate comfort. When you are feeling most ashamed and guilty or angry, which is the projection of the guilt and the shame, that literally you are, all that's going on is that you are in error. You are making a mistake. Okay? And what did it say earlier? That's the whole foundation of healing. The minute you go, oh, I'm not guilty, I'm just mistaken. Oh, and since I'm just mistaken and not guilty, then whatever I'm perceiving can be corrected. Oh, I ask for love's correction of my beliefs right here. That is the foundation of healing, whatever. That is the idea that corrects and heals all things, no matter how difficult or different those problems seem to be. I love it. Tricia says, I loved the wrong person. Okay. Well, all you need to remember, Tricia, is that somehow you have been mistaken, and then offer that mistake to love to correct. Love can correct your error, whatever that error is. And you don't really know exactly what the error is. The error is not that you love the wrong person. The error is that you believe that you are guilty. That's the error. And now when you believe that you're guilty, what are you going to attract? Who are you going to be attracted to? If you believe you're guilty, if you believe in sin, who are you going to attract? Who are you going to be attracted to? Someone whom, in your perception, punishes you. So the error is not that you love the wrong person. It's just that you have believed in guilt from way back, no telling how way back, and so you unconsciously invited punishment. Yes, Brett.
And we can remember that sometimes everything that we came to learn in that relationship, we learned.
Yeah.
We succeeded.
Absolutely.
Now it's time to move on to other relationships that we can grow more from and learn bigger.
Exactly.
lessons.
Thank you. And so Greg is reminding you and me and us, Tricia, that that when you recognize the value of what you've learned with this person, then you realize that they were helpful. They were a miracle. They were very helpful. They were the right person to learn what you needed to learn, Tricia, which is that you are not guilty. Just like you said, she goes, I'm not guilty. That person was the right person for you to learn that you are not guilty.
Somebody else wouldn't have taught her that.
Yes, exactly. Somebody else would not have taught you that as well as this person did. And so you drew this person because you knew that person would be the best person to learn the truth once and for all that you are not guilty. And what does that mean when you say, I'm not guilty? It means I'm just mistaken and I deserve love and correction and I don't deserve punishment. That's what it means to say, I'm not guilty. I was mistaken, and that was an error, but error is a call for correction, and I deserve only love and correction for my belief that I was guilty, that I learned. Of course you're innocent for your belief in sin and guilt. That's just what you learned from people who didn't know any better themselves. So how could you be guilty for having guilt and sin belief system within you? You can't be guilty. That's just what you learned. You're innocent. And whatever is going on, whatever problems are those were your attraction to punishment from your belief in sin. That was you punishing yourself to try to feel innocent again. And just a mistake, and it can be corrected. So the only thing that keeps our problems from being corrected gently and beautifully and profoundly is feeling guilty about them. Okay? If you want to keep a problem, feel guilty about it. Okay? If you don't want to keep repeating a problem, say no to feeling guilt and acknowledge it was just a mistake, and a mistake is a call for correction. And ask for love's correction for whatever belief. Ask love's correction for your belief in guilt and your belief in sin. Okay? And Liliana says, innocente, innocente. Amen to that. All right. Now, it says, yet for all the wild insanity inherent in the whole idea of sin, sin is impossible. Now, where else do you hear that besides in A Course in Miracles? And how can the immortal die? That's an interesting question. How can the immortal die? Yeah, good question. Sin is the belief that the immortal can die. That's what sin is. Now we're going to start in paragraph 4. I love it. Yes, Bridget says, nope, no guilt. We have all done this. LOL. That's right. No guilt. It's just a mistake, and we've all made that mistake. So there's only one mistake. We've all made it, so no need to feel guilty about it. Just bring it for love's correction.
We're all the same.
We're all the same. All the same. None of us, we've all made the same mistake, and we're all corrected in the same way together. So, beautiful. Now we're on paragraph number 4. A major tenet in the ego's insane religion is that sin is not error. Sin is the truth. And what in the major tenet in the ego's insane religion is that it's innocence that would deceive. In the ego's insane religion, purity is seen as arrogance. Recognize this?
Mm-hmm.
And in the ego's insane religion, the acceptance of yourself as sinful is perceived as holy. And this doctrine about purity is arrogance and holiness is accepting yourself as sinful, it is this doctrine that replaces the reality of you and me as our Creator created us and willed that we be forever. Now, is something that completely goes against what God has created us to be, is that humility? Is that humility to see yourself as guilty when your Creator created you forever to be innocent and sinless? Is that humility? So, it says, or is it rather an attempt to wrest creation away from truth and to keep it separate for yourself? Okay. I love it. So do you recognize the ego's insane religion? Okay. Recognize the ego's insane religion. In the ego's insane religion, let's go over it. In the ego's insane religion, sin isn't error, sin is truth. Check. In the ego's insane religion, it's innocence or blamelessness that would deceive. Check. And in the ego's insane religion, purity is seen as arrogance. Check. And in the ego's insane religion, the acceptance of yourself as sinful is perceived as holiness. Check. Okay? That's all the religions I've ever experienced in my life. They all check, 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 check.
Yep.
The ego's insane religion. Okay? And the ego's insane religion takes the form of many religions. Okay? And the ego's insane religion takes the form of no religion, but a belief system. Now, it says, and then the voice of the Course asks us, is that humility, really, to believe something that is completely opposite of the way God created us to be? Is that really humility? Is believing that you can turn yourself into something guilty when God created you innocent, is that really humility? Is believing that you are sinful really holy?
Yeah. Well, you gotta get that way.
Yeah, that's what we all learned, that the person who accepts themselves the most guilty, the most sinful, they're the most holy. That's what we've learned in all of our religions, which now, according to this, is really one version of the ego's insane religion. there's a section in the original dictation called the ego's religion. And I love that section. It really goes through the nature of the ego's religion, and it looks and sounds exactly like the religions of the world. It's a great section to read in the original edition, in the original dictation. Now, so really the whole notion of guilt and sin and shame and all that really is me trying to wrestle away reality and creation and take it on to myself. Now, I will be God. Okay, beautiful. All right. Now we're going to go to paragraph 5. It says, any attempt to reinterpret sin as error is completely indefensible to the ego. The ego's like, I cannot have that. That is unacceptable. That is indefensible. You may not reinterpret sin as error, says the ego. No, that is not an error. That's a sin. And you cannot interpret that sin as an error. That's completely unacceptable, indefensible to the ego. Why is that? Why is that? The reason that any attempt to reinterpret sin as error is wholly indefensible to the ego, that's because the idea of sin is wholly sacrosanct. The idea of sin is wholly sacred in the ego's thought system, in the ego's religion. And the idea of sin is quite unapproachable, except through reverence in the ego's insane religion. You see that? In the ego's insane religion, you cannot even approach the idea of sin without reverence. That, you know why? Because sin, the belief in sin, that is the most, quote, holy concept in the ego's system. The ego's belief system, the ego's insane religion, it is the fundamental, foundational, most sacred belief in the ego's insane religion thought system is sin. It is the most sacred belief. It is the most holy concept in the ego's belief system. The concept of sin is lovely, powerful, wholly true, and necessarily protected with every defense at the ego's disposal. Whew.
An idol.
I'm telling you, the idea of sin is what is in the holies of the holy in every religion. And you may not even approach the holies of the holy, the belief in sin, without profound reverence. The belief in sin is the most holy concept in the ego's belief system, which is the ego's insane religion. Wow. Yep, that's for sure. I mean, look at the religions of the world. Every single one of them has made the belief in sin the holy of holies that you can't even approach without complete and total reverence. And anybody who questions the belief in sin is doing the ultimate blasphemy worthy of death. Okay?
So rather than God kill you, we'll just do it for God.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. In ego's insane religion, instead of God killing you because you questioned sin, the ego's disciples will kill you for God. Thank you. You're welcome. Wow, that is so deep. And, you know, you're looking throughout history, the teachers of love who came and said there was no sin, you know, what happened to them? They were called blasphemous, traitors, and they were killed. Right? Their bodies were killed. Why? Because they did not approach the holies of the holiest concept of all in the ego's insane religion. They didn't approach that concept of sin with reverence. They didn't see it as holy. And so they questioned it. And they denied it. And so to the ego's insane religion, that is the ultimate blasphemy, deserving death. Wow, sounds so familiar. So familiar. And so you can see that the ego's insane religion is what rules this world at this time. And we, the teachers of love, are here for the purpose of questioning the belief in sin and going, that ain't so holy, that ain't even real, that's not even true. That's what we're here to do, is to not be like, oh, sin, oh, guilt, oh, I'm not worthy. Let me bow down with total reverence. Our job as teachers and healers of the world is to not bow down to the belief in sin as if it is real and true, as if it has more power than God. And that's our job. And we start within ourselves and in our relationships. And it goes on to say about the belief in sin that the purpose of sin is the purpose of the special relationship. So where does it start? Where do we start as teachers and healers of the planet? Where do we start in affirming that there is no sin? We start in ourselves and in our relationships, where we go, okay, whatever this person is doing or saying isn't a sin. The worst it could be is an error. And also, I am not guilty. I'm not sinful just because this person I'm in a relationship with says I am. And I am not guilty. And I bring that belief, that idea in sin for correction. That's just an error. Okay, so where does it start? Okay, that was the next line. So, sin is the most, quote, holy concept in the ego's system. In the ego's insane religion, the ego's belief system, sin is lovely, sin is powerful, sin is completely true, and sin is necessarily protected with every defense at the ego's disposal. Because here lies the ego's, quote, best defense, which all the other ego defenses serve. Here, in the belief in sin as holy, the belief that sin is holy, here is the ego's armor, here is the ego's protection, and here sin is the fundamental purpose of the special relationship in the ego's interpretation. Oh, great. So, what's the purpose of our relationships in the ego's interpretation? Is to keep the sin going, honey. To keep the belief in sin going, which means to keep the punishment going. And now, what better way to keep punishment going in your life? Go have a relationship where guilt is real and guilt is accepted and guilt is used. What better way to keep punishment going than having the belief in guilt be the fundamental purpose of your relationship? You know, having a relationship where we're using guilt to manipulate each other, and we're just trading guilt back and forth, trying to control each other. That is the purpose of our relationships in the ego's interpretation, to keep the guilt going, honey. And nothing does it better than that, right? Nothing does it better than that. So when you are using and seeing your relationship with the interpretation of your ego through your ego's eyes, when you're letting your ego interpret the purpose of your relationship, then the whole relationship is just going to be a big old guilt exchange. I give you some guilt, and you give me some guilt, and I give you some guilt, and then we just that's what we do. Well, we call it love, but it makes our relationship hell. And that's the whole purpose of our relationships in the ego's interpretation. And boy, does it serve that purpose well when we allow the ego's purpose to be, when we allow our ego to use our relationship for its purpose, which is keeping the belief in sin and guilt going. Wow. Okay, yes, it sure does. Our relationships are the perfect vehicle for keeping our shame and guilt and anger going, if that's what we are allowing them to be used for. Now, there is a totally different purpose and interpretation of our relationships that we could accept that doesn't have anything to do with keeping guilt and sin going. There's a whole nother interpretation of our relationships that, if we were to accept it, would be how that our relationships now are the ultimate proof of our innocence. And wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be great to have a relationship where you prove each other's innocence instead of you prove each other's guilt and sin? That would be different. That would be wonderful. And so we're asking for the interpretation of our relationships that doesn't keep guilt going, doesn't keep the belief in sin going. It has the purpose of correcting the mistake that is the belief in sin and guilt. Beautiful. Irene says the purpose of sin is the purpose of the special relationship. That's exactly right. The purpose of sin is the purpose of the special relationship. And the purpose of the special relationship, as the ego sees it, is to keep the belief in sin and guilt going, honey. And nothing serves that purpose better than a special relationship. But that's just an error, and it can be corrected very easily and gracefully should we want and ask for a different interpretation of what our relationships are for. Now, the purpose of our relationship is to release each other and ourselves from guilt. Imagine having that as the purpose of your relationships. That's what a holy relationship is, where two people have agreed that their purpose is not to continue to make each other feel guilty so you can get more of what you want, which is control and power, but we've accepted that the purpose of our relationship is to release each other and ourselves from guilt. Now, that is a holy relationship. Okay? That's a holy relationship that isn't attracting a ton of punishment to it, okay? And through it. Beautiful. Thank you, Irene. Now we're in paragraph 6. It can indeed be said that the ego made the ego's world on sin, for sure. Only in such a world made on sin could everything be upside down. Have you ever noticed that everything in this world is upside down? That's right. And backwards. That's because the ego made its world on sin. The ego's world was made on the belief in sin. And this belief in sin is the strange illusion which makes the clouds of guilt seem heavy and impenetrable. The solidness this world's foundation seems to have is found in the belief in sin. Why? Because sin has changed creation from an idea of God to an ideal the ego wants. And what's the ideal the ego wants? A world the ego rules. What's the ego's ideal? A world made up of bodies that are mindless, and bodies that are not only mindless, but bodies that are capable of complete corruption and decay. That is the world the ego wants. That is how the ego world is. It's a perfect description of the ego world. It's a perfect description of the world as we know it, which obviously must be the ego world. What does the ego want? The ego wants a world the ego rules. The ego wants a world made up of bodies that are mindless and capable of complete corruption and decay. Well, that's a perfect description of the world that we live in right now. So we could say right now what we're experiencing is the ego's world. That's what we're experiencing right now. Okay? And it's sin that believes that it has changed creation from an idea of God to an ideal world the ego wants. Wow. So what rules the world as we see it right now? What is the world as we see it right now based on, built on? It is the belief in sin. But, good news, if the belief in sin is a mistake, then the belief in sin and the whole world that's based on sin can be undone easily by truth. I love it. So I may have built my life and built my world on the belief in sin. I may have built my life and my world on the belief that I am guilty and that I deserve punishment. But since the belief in sin is a mistake, then the world I built on my belief in sin can be undone easily by truth. The world I made can be undone easily by truth. The relationship I made based on guilt can be undone easily by truth. This physical condition that I made by my belief in sin and guilt, it can be easily undone by truth. Anything that I'm experiencing that came from or was built upon the belief in sin and guilt can be easily undone by truth. Thank you, God. That's the thing we want to remember here. I love it. Beautiful. Any mistake can be corrected if truth be left to judge that mistake. But if the mistake is given the status of the truth, then to what can the mistake be brought? The so-called holiness of sin is kept in place by just this strange belief. Strange device. Okay? And so the so-called holiness of sin, how is it kept in place? By the strange device of it being called truth.
Which means it's believed in.
Exactly. Instead of it being called a mistake and being brought to truth. That's the strange device that keeps the belief in sin going. It keeps it from being corrected. As truth, this so-called sin and this problem, as a truth, this belief in sin, this guilt is inviolate. As truth, this guilt, this problem is inviolate, can be changed. And everything is brought to the mistake for judgment. But as a mistake, this problem, this guilt, this belief in sin, as a mistake, it must be brought to truth. I see. I still have this mistake because number one, I wasn't calling it a mistake. I was calling it a sin and just feeling guilty about it, and I wasn't bringing it to truth. I was bringing it to guilt. And then nothing changed. Now I still have this pattern. I still have this condition. I've had it for so long, so many years. Yeah, because you're not acknowledging that it's a mistake. You're not acknowledging that it's a belief in sin and guilt and that it's a mistake. And so you're not bringing it to truth to correct it. And that's why you still have that problem. That's why you still have that pattern. But as a mistake, it must be brought to truth. So, to bring it to truth, you got to say, oh, this is my belief in sin and guilt, and it's just a mistake. This is my belief in sin and guilt, and this is my belief that I deserve punishment, and it's just a mistake, and now I'm going to bring that mistake to truth for correction. That's when the problem or the pattern ceases. That's when it stops. It is impossible to have faith in sin, because sin is faithlessness. But it is possible to have faith that a mistake can be corrected. Beautiful. So you're not going to be able to have true faith that this is bad, this is a sin, this can't be corrected, this person deserves punishment, this mistake is, this problem and mistake is irreversible. Even God can't forgive this person or me. So that it's impossible to have faith in sin because sin is faithlessness, but it is possible to have faith that a mistake can be corrected. Hallelujah. There is no stone in all the ego's fortress there's no stone in all the ego's fortress more heavily defended than the idea that sin is real. Dang. There is no stone in all the ego's fortress that is not more heavily defended than the idea that sin is the natural expression of what you have made yourself to be and what you are. That is the ego's cornerstone. There is no stone in the ego's fortress that is more heavily defended than the idea that sin is real and you are sin, that you are a sinner, you are sinful.
That's why they came up with backsliding to reinforce it. So you keep coming back and reinforcing it. Say, I'm sorry I sinned.
Yes.
Sorry I sinned.
Yeah, that's why they came up with the whole solution called confession. You're like, oh, if you just come and confess it, it'll all be better. When the truth is that every time you confess that you're a sinner, you are actually making the idea of sin more powerful and attracting more punishment into your life.
Yep.
You know, only in the ego's insane religion based on sin do you need to come confess that you are a sinner. Okay? In the ego's insane religion, if you want to be, quote, forgiven by God, you got to confess that you have sinned and that you are a sinner, that you are guilty, and then beg for atonement. That is how it goes in the ego's insane religions. Okay? And that is the most sacred and heavily, the most sacred and most heavily defended idea in the ego's insane churches that the ego builds to itself. Now, to the ego, your guilt, that is no mistake. That you are born in sin, you are sinful, you're guilty. To the ego, that's no mistake. That you're guilty and that you are a sinner and that you do sin, that is your reality. That is the so-called truth from which your escape will always be impossible, according to the ego, according to the ego's insane religions. Yeah, that's right. You know, in the ego's insane religions, if you say there is no sin, they say that's a blasphemy worthy of death. And in the insane religions, in the ego's insane religions, many people have been put to death because they dared to question the most sacred concept in the ego's insane religion, which is not only do you sin, but you are a sinner, and there's no getting around that. Okay? And to the ego, your guilt is no mistake. To the ego, in the ego's insane religion, your guilt is reality, and your guilt is the so-called truth from which escape will always be impossible. In the ego's insane religion, your guilt is your past, your guilt is your present, and your guilt is your future. To your ego, in the ego's insane religion. That's your past, sin's your present, and sin is your future. Because in the ego's insane religion, you have somehow managed to corrupt your own creator and change your creator's mind completely. Somehow, says the ego, in the ego's insane religions. And so, in the ego's insane religions, you need to mourn then the death of God, whom your guilt has killed! Exclamation point. You are so guilty, you killed God. That's how guilty you are. You God killer. You creator killer, you. That's what guilt is. That's what sin says. That you're so bad, you killed God. You know, God was all doing great, powerful, all loving, until what you did, Sally. And now it was so bad what you did. Your sin was so great that you killed God. You broke God. That's how guilty you are. You broke God. You know what you did last night? That was so bad. You broke God. You broke God. I hope you feel bad for that. Okay? That is what the ego's wish is. It says, and this would be the ego's wish. That you do something that's so guilty, so sinful, that you don't broke God. You killed God. That's how guilty you are. That is the ego's wish. Which in its madness, the ego thinks that you have accomplished. That is what the ego thinks you've done. You're so bad, you broke God. Damn, that's pretty bad. Now, wouldn't you rather that all this be nothing more than just a mistake? Wouldn't you rather that all that you're feeling guilty about and ashamed of, wouldn't you rather that that just be a mistake, entirely correctable, and so easily escaped from that its whole correction is like walking through a mist into the sunlight? Wouldn't you prefer that? If that was an option, wouldn't you prefer that? Well, good news, it is possible, because that is all that your belief in sin and guilt, that is all your shame and guilt is. That is all it is. It is just a mist before the sun. That's all it is. And aren't you glad that this mistake that you were feeling like was an irreversible, uncorrectable sin, aren't you glad that it was nothing more than just a mistake that is entirely correctable and just like as easily escaped from, that is the whole, is like walking through a mist into the sunlight? Isn't that great? Wouldn't you rather that be true about what you are suffering from? Wouldn't you rather that that be true, more true about what you are suffering from, feeling guilty and ashamed of, and unconsciously requesting punishment for? Wouldn't you rather it be just an error, a mistake that is easily corrected, as is the mist in front of the sun? Well, I would prefer that what I'm feeling guilty about and unconsciously requesting punishment for in my life, I would rather it just be a mistake that is easily corrected and like nothing more than a mist before the sun. I would prefer that because I don't like the feeling of feeling guilty, and I don't want to continue to unconsciously request punishment for this, which is not a sin, it's just a mistake. So I don't want to be punishing myself anymore for something that's just a mistake, something that I learned that wasn't true from people who didn't know the truth. Like, I don't want to punish myself anymore unconsciously, attracted, for something that I'm not even guilty for. It was just a mistake, and an innocent mistake. I made that mistake because that's what I learned from people who didn't know the truth themselves. So I would much rather what I'm feeling guilty and ashamed of just be a mistake that is easily corrected by love. And so whatever it is that you are suffering from, whatever it is that you're feeling ashamed of, feeling guilty about, whatever punishment or whatever suffering you're experiencing, the answer is to remember that there is no sin, and whatever this is, it came from a mistake. That it doesn't mean you're guilty. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're sinful. It just means that you made a mistake, and your mistake now needs to be brought to truth for loving correction. That is how this problem disappears. This is how this problem, this sickness, is healed. You recognize that it's coming as an unconscious request for punishment based on your belief that you're guilty, and then the recognition that it's just a mistake, and then you bring that mistake, that belief that you are guilty somehow, to love, to truth, to be corrected gently. That is the basis of true healing. That is how problems and suffering really do disappear. Any other approaches, problem-solving approaches, healing approaches that involve any kind of guilt or punishment does not work. The problem will not go away. All right, so the problem is the belief in guilt, and the answer is bringing the belief in guilt to truth as just an error that needs correction. That's the Course in Miracles healing method right there. It says, perhaps you would be tempted to agree with the ego that it's far better to be sinful than mistaken, but think you carefully before you allow yourself to make such a choice, and approach this choice not lightly, for this choice is the choice of hell or heaven. All right. So what's the choice that I'm not supposed to approach lightly because it's the choice between hell and heaven? It's the choice, it's the temptation where the ego's saying that it's far better to be sinful than mistaken, is what the ego is tempting us to believe. You know how we are. We would rather die than say we were wrong. And that's what he's talking about. How we would rather say, well, I'm just a guilty sinner, I can't help it, than to say, I was mistaken. We'd rather be a guilty sinner who can't help it than to say, I was mistaken. And so he's saying the ego is going to be tempting you with that nonsense, of saying, don't say you're wrong, you're not wrong. It's better for you to go, I'm a guilty sinner, that I can't help it, that's why I did that. When the ego tempts you with that insanity, that madness, remember, it is not better to say, I couldn't help it because I'm a guilty sinner, than to say, I was mistaken. I chose to believe in sin and guilt, and I attracted punishment myself, and that was a mistake. I was mistaken. That was a call for love, and that is my call for correction. Okay? That is the only real and true and lasting problem-solving approach. Beautiful. Irene says, instead of being a guilty sinner, say instead, I was mistaken. Yeah, and we all know about that part of ourselves that would rather die than to say, I was mistaken, I was wrong. Who wants to say, I was wrong? I'd rather die than say, I was wrong. And that's what the ego tempts us. The ego says, on pain of death, do not say you were wrong. What you should say is, I'm a guilty sinner, I couldn't help it. Right? I was born in sin, I was made this way, and I can't help it. He says, it's not better to be sinful than being mistaken. It's not better to say, I'm a guilty sinner, I can't help it, than to say, I was mistaken, and I bring my mistake to love for correction. Beautiful. All right, so now I'm going to do just a couple of announcements, and then we're just going to do a few minutes of an integration meditation, which I always end my classes with. All right, thank you guys for joining today. And my announcements are that Greg and I do Sunday and Tuesday Course in Miracles class, which is transforming relationships through A Course in Miracles, where here on my Facebook channel, we take the Course in Miracles and we apply it to our relationships, and we hope to help you guys to use these ideas to apply to your relationships to get the miracles that come from applying these ideas to your relationships. Okay? And there's no order of difficulty in miracles, which means there is no relationship problem that the ideas in this curriculum cannot bring correction to. That's why they call it A Course in Miracles. There's nothing it cannot do within your relationships. Okay, beautiful. And that's Sunday and Tuesdays on my Facebook channel at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And also, I'm a holistic psychotherapist, and I have a psychotherapeutic practice called Miracle Psychotherapeutics. And that is for folks like you who might like some support while you're going through a challenge, but you would like that support from a Course in Miracles perspective. So if I was needing some counseling, I would only want to go to somebody, for me, I would only want to go to somebody who knew the Course in Miracles principles to help me work through whatever I might be going through. And so I am available for that. I'm a licensed professional counselor of over 25 years. And so if you or somebody you know could really use some kind of support like that, then find my phone number in the body of this text and then text me. So that's that. And that's it for announcements. And also, as I was saying earlier, I'm not doing an in-person Monday class at the Rocky Mountain Miracle Center for the winter. So for the winter, I am doing my Monday night Course in Miracles classes, practical and healing applications, just on my Facebook live stream. So thank you so much for being here. And if you want to support this Miracles ministry, then you can share this video on your Facebook, or if you are watching this on YouTube, then you can support this ministry by hitting like, share, and subscribe. And that helps the algorithm to push this class out to more folks. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. All right, let's do our 2 or 3 minute integration meditation, where we take the ideas and we use them. All right, so let's close our eyes and take a breath. And just notice how it feels to have heard these ideas today. Thank you, God, for A Course in Miracles. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for these ideas. Truly, thank you. The ultimate gift. Beautiful. Now let's apply these ideas. I want you to bring to your awareness a situation or a relationship where there is some guilt, some anger, some shame, whether it's theirs or yours. I want you to bring to your awareness any situation or relationship where guilt and anger seem real and justified. And bring to your awareness any situation or relationship where there's some suffering. It's all the same. Beautiful. Now I want you to say to yourself, or say of someone else, this person can be mistaken. This person may be deceiving themselves. This person can might be even turning the power of their mind against themselves, but this person cannot sin. They cannot be guilty. Now I want you to say that about yourself. I can be mistaken. I can deceive myself. I can even turn the power of my mind against myself, but I cannot be guilty. I want you to say to yourself about that person, there's nothing this person cannot do that would really change their reality in any way or make them really guilty. And now I want you to say that about yourself. There's nothing I can do that would really change my reality in any way and make me really guilty. Because there is no sin. Sin is impossible. Now I want you to tell yourself, there is no mistake that I make or they make that cannot be corrected by love. There is no mistake that I made or they make that cannot be corrected by love. Now I want you to say about them, the guilt I see in them is not the truth. It's just an error. And breathe. Now I want you to tell yourself, I cannot change myself from how God created me to be, which is sinless forever. I remain as God created me, which is sinless forever. And my reality cannot be changed just because I made a mistake. I want you to tell yourself, my guilt and my shame does not make me holy. It makes me mistaken in what I think I am. Now I want you to think about the guilt and the shame and the suffering that you've been experiencing in this situation or this relationship or within yourself. And I want you to tell yourself, what I am believing right now is a mistake. This suffering, this pain, this guilt, this shame, it is a mistake. And it can be corrected. It can easily be undone by truth. And now I want you to bring this mistake called shame, called guilt, called anger, all the same. I want you to bring it to love. I want you to bring it to truth and go, here truth, here love, here is my belief in sin and guilt and shame and the anger that I projected it with. Here it is. Please correct this for me. The guilt and the shame that I'm feeling that I've projected with my anger, it is not the truth of me. It's not the truth of them. And I give it to you, love, to correct for me. I want you now to see this mistake, this problem, this grievance, this suffering, this sickness. I want you to see it as a mist in front of sunlight. And I want you to imagine yourself walking through this mist, this guilt, this shame, this anger, and into the sunlight, because that is all it is. See it as a mist before the sunlight and imagine yourself walking right on through it. Notice how you feel now. Notice how you feel now. Beautiful. always say. Amen. All right. Thank you guys for joining this healing circle. Thank you guys for sharing this in whatever way you do that. Thank you for supporting this ministry. And just know that I and Greg both appreciate you profoundly and love you. See you next time I see you.
We sure do.